The neon lights of Seoul's Hongdae district blurred into streaks of hot pink and electric blue through the heavy downpour. Amina pulled her thin canvas jacket tighter around her shoulders, her fingers gripping a stack of international business textbooks like a shield against the freezing rain. Life in South Korea was supposed to be an adventure, a stepping stone to building her dream consulting firm. Instead, it was a relentless cycle of exhausting lectures, grueling part-time English tutoring gigs, and staring at a bank account balance that seemed to shrink by the hour. Tonight, after a 12-hour day of studying and working, her body ached, her natural curls were thoroughly soaked despite her umbrella, and all she wanted was the sanctuary of her tiny Goshuwon room. Wiping a mix of rainwater and sweat from her eyes, Amina checked her phone. The rideshare app showed her driver was 2 minutes away. Just as she slipped the phone into her pocket, a sleek midnight black luxury sedan pulled up smoothly to the curb right in front of her. The tinted windows were completely opaque, but the car's presence practically screamed VIP. Relieved that her ride had arrived early, Amina didn't hesitate. She yanked the heavy passenger door open, shook off her dripping umbrella, and slid into the plush, heated leather back seat, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. "Thank God," she muttered in English, leaning her head back. "The weather out there is absolutely brutal." There was no reply. The car didn't pull away from the curb either. Sensing an eerie stillness, Amina opened her eyes and turned her head. Her breath hitched. The man sitting next to her was definitely not an underpaid rideshare driver. He was devastatingly handsome, with a sharp, aristocratic jawline, a flawless complexion, and intense dark eyes that cut through the dim interior light like ice. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that practically radiated wealth. Amina's heart dropped into her stomach as her brain finally connected the face to the dozens of financial magazine covers she had analyzed in class. This was Kang Min-Jae, the ruthless billionaire CEO and notorious ice prince of the investment world. Before she could stammer an apology and reach for the door handle, Min-Jae turned, his chilling, unbothered gaze toward her. He didn't look surprised, he looked calculating. Without a word, he opened a sleek leather briefcase, pulled out a crisp, single-page document, and slid it across the seat, landing it perfectly on her lap. "I'll pay you $17,000 to pretend to be my girlfriend for 30 days, he said, his English flawless, his voice a deep, commanding baritone. Amina stared at the paper, then up at his completely expressionless face. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. She wasn't an object to be bought, no matter how many zeros were on his bank statement. Her fierce pride flared instantly. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, or what kind of women you're used to buying," Amina said, her voice dripping with absolute scorn as she shoved the paper back at him. "But my dignity isn't for sale. Find someone else." Pushing the door open, she stepped back out into the freezing rain, slamming the heavy sedan door behind her without looking back. The storm inside the Kang family estate was far worse than the rain outside. Min-Jae stood rigidly by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his grandfather's traditional study, his hands clasped behind his back as his stepmother's voice cut through the silence like broken glass. She was holding a dossier of traditional heiresses, demanding he choose a bride before the final merger vote. To them, his bachelor status was a liability, a sign of instability that made conservative investors nervous. "If you cannot secure a proper alliance, Min-Jae, the board will look to your cousin to lead the conglomerate," his grandfather warned, his voice heavy with ancient authority. Min-Jae's jaw tightened. He had built this empire with his own sweat and brilliant calculated risks, yet his entire life's work was being reduced to an arranged marriage. He needed a shield, a woman who couldn't be manipulated by his family's corporate games. And his mind, infuriatingly, kept drifting back to the fierce, dark-eyed stranger who had slammed his car door and walked into the storm. Across the city, a different kind of ruin loomed over Amina. The fluorescent lights of the university's international student office buzzed overhead, mimicking the painful throbbing in her temples. She stared at the computer screen as the administrator delivered the devastating news in polite, sympathetic Korean. The wire transfer from her sponsor back home had been completely frozen due to a sudden banking crisis in Chicago. Because of the clerical error, her tuition payment had bounced. "I'm truly sorry, Amina," the administrator said, adjusting her glasses. "According to immigration regulations, if the tuition isn't cleared within 48 hours, your enrollment will be cancelled. We will have no choice but to report your status to the Ministry of Justice." The words echoed hollowly in Amina's ears. 48 hours. If she couldn't find the money, her student visa would be revoked, her dreams of launching her global consulting firm would vanish, and she would be forced to leave South Korea in absolute disgrace. She walked out into the campus courtyard, her knees shaking. She pulled out her phone and opened her banking app, staring at the pathetic double-digit balance. Her fierce, stubborn pride had always been her armor, but pride couldn't pay a multi-million-won tuition bill. She had no one to turn to, no wealthy relatives, and no time to secure a legal loan. As a cool breeze rustled the damp trees, a memory suddenly flashed in her mind. A sleek midnight black sedan, a crisp white contract, and a deep, commanding voice offering exactly $17,000. It was a lifeline wrapped in a golden cage. Amina closed her eyes, swallowing the bitter taste of defeat. Her dignity was precious, but her future was priceless. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out the business card. Min-Jae's assistant had slipped into her pocket before she stormed out the previous night. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number. The glass elevator glided silently up the side of the luxury high-rise, revealing a panoramic view of Seoul's glittering skyline. For Amina, the view felt less like a triumph and more like an impending trap. When the doors slid open directly into Min-Jae's penthouse, she was met with minimalist luxury, polished concrete, dark marble, and an oppressive, quiet grandeur. Min-Jae's assistant, a sharp-dressed man, who introduced himself as Mr. Han, bowed politely and guided her toward a sprawling living area. Min-Jae was already waiting. He sat on a charcoal leather sofa, looking effortlessly commanding, in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. On the glass coffee table between them lay the same single-page contract. "You're late by 5 minutes," Min-Jae said, without looking up from his tablet. He set the device down, his intense dark eyes locking onto hers. "But you're here, which means your pride finally met its price." Amina swallowed the sting of his words, refusing to let him see her flinch. She sat down opposite him, squaring her shoulders. "Let's get one thing straight. I am here because I have a temporary financial emergency, not because you bought me. If I sign this, we do it on my terms too." Min-Jae leaned back, a ghostly hint of amusement flickering across his sharp features. "Amuse me. What are your terms?" "Strict professionalism," Amina said firmly, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "We only appear together in public for your corporate events or family gatherings. No unscripted touching, no invasion of my personal space, and absolutely no domestic performance behind closed doors. When the 30 days are up, the wire transfer clears, and we completely erase each other from our lives." Min-Jae nodded slowly, sliding a sleek fountain pen across the table. "Agreed. I am paying for a convincing public illusion to satisfy my investors and family, nothing more. My assistant has already added a non-disclosure clause. If either of us breaks the arrangement, or if any hint of this contract leaks, the deal is void." He paused, his gaze dropping to her lips before returning to her eyes with an icy intensity. And the most important rule, Ms. Johnson, absolutely no real feelings. I don't do romance, and I expect you to remember this is a business transaction. You don't have to worry about that, Amina countered, her tone dripping with quiet defiance. You are entirely not my type. She picked up the heavy pen. The gold nib hovered over the signature line for a fraction of a second. A final look at the precipice of her independence. Then, thinking of her future and the 48-hour deadline looming over her visa, she signed her name in bold, elegant strokes. She slid the paper back to him. The devil's bargain was sealed. The private boutique in Cheongdam-dong had been closed to the public, its high ceilings and velvet curtains radiating exclusive wealth. Racks of pastel silk dresses and diamond-encrusted traditional garments lined the walls, curated specifically by Min-Jae's personal stylists. Min-Jae sat in a plush armchair, sipping an espresso, while a flock of attendants hovered around Amina, holding up garments meant to transform her into a quiet, compliant heiress. The pastel pink lace, Min-Jae directed coolly, gesturing to a dress that looked fragile enough to tear. And have the salon team straighten her hair. We need an aesthetic that blends seamlessly into the background of a conservative corporate gala. Amina stepped out from behind the dressing curtain, pushing a stylist's hand away gently but firmly. She looked at the delicate pink fabric, then met Min-Jae's icy gaze in the mirror. No, she said, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the boutique. Min-Jae raised an eyebrow, setting his espresso down. We discussed this, Ms. Johnson. Your wardrobe is part of the illusion. The illusion is that I'm your girlfriend, not your puppet, Amina countered, squaring her shoulders. She ran a hand over her neatly styled, elegant natural twists. I am not chemically straightening my hair, and I am not hiding who I am in washed-out pastels that don't even complement my skin tone. If I'm supposed to be a confident international business student who caught the eye of the ice prince, I shouldn't look like I'm trying to blend into the wallpaper. The boutique staff held their breath, terrified of the billionaire's notorious temper. Min-Jae stood up, his tall, athletic frame towering over her as he walked over. The tension between them was thick, a silent battle of wills, playing out under the glittering chandeliers. He looked at her natural twists, then down at her rich, dark brown skin, which practically glowed against the stark boutique lighting. For a man used to absolute obedience, her defiance was a sudden electric jolt. Then what do you suggest? He asked, his voice dropping to a low, challenging baritone. Amina walked past him, her eyes scanning the racks until she found a structured, emerald green tailored suit dress with sharp lines and a bold silhouette. It was sophisticated, commanding, and unapologetically modern. She held it up. This. It commands respect. It shows intelligence. And it fits the woman I actually am. Min-Jae stared at her for a long, silent moment. Behind his guarded, expressionless mask, an unfamiliar spark of genuine respect flared. Every woman his family had ever forced upon him had tried desperately to mold themselves into his world. Amina was forcing his world to look at her. Fine, Min-Jae said softly, turning back to his assistant. Cancel the salon appointment. We take the emerald. It seems my fake girlfriend has her own claws. The grand ballroom of the Schiller Hotel was a sea of glittering crystal chandeliers, expensive champagne, and whispered corporate secrets. As Amina walked in, her hand resting lightly on the crisp sleeve of Min-Jae's tuxedo, the room fell into a collective, stunned silence. In her structured, emerald green suit dress and elegant, natural twists, she looked like a vibrant jewel among the monochrome sea of conservative high society. Necks turned, and critical whispers rippled through the crowd of elite investors and older executives. Min-Jae remained an unreadable statue beside her, but she could feel the intense scrutiny boring into them. "Stay close," Min-Jae murmured, his head tilting just enough for his breath to brush her ear. "The wolves are already circling." The warning came to fruition minutes later when Chairman Park, a powerful traditional investor known for his deep-seated elitism and skepticism of Min-Jae's impending merger, intercepted them. He held a glass of whiskey, a condescending smirk playing on his lips as his eyes swept over Amina with blatant dismissiveness. "Ah, Min-Jae, so this is the young woman distracting you from your duties," Chairman Park said in Korean, not bothering to greet Amina directly. He switched to a heavy, accented English, his tone dripping with mock curiosity. "Tell me, Ms. Johnson, since you have caught the eye of our tech giant, what do you think of the current volatility in the Southeast Asian semiconductor supply chain, especially regarding the new tariff barriers in Vietnam? Or do you find shopping in Cheongdam-dong more interesting?" The circle of surrounding executives chuckled softly, waiting for the broke, foreign student to stammer in embarrassment. Min-Jae's jaw tightened, his gaze turning lethal as he prepared to intervene and cut the man down. But Amina didn't flinch. She took a calm, elegant sip of her sparkling water, smiled warmly, and looked Chairman Park dead in the eye. "Actually, Chairman Park, if you look at the Q2 data, the volatility isn't driven by the tariff barriers in Vietnam at all," Amina replied, her voice smooth, articulate, and carrying perfectly across the immediate circle. "It's a direct result of the liquidity crunch in the regional raw material suppliers. If Min-Jae's conglomerate shifts its primary assembly logistics to the newly emerging economic zones in Indonesia, which already boast a 30% tax holiday for digital infrastructure, the tariff issue becomes entirely redundant. In fact, it would optimize the merger's projected revenue by 12% in the first fiscal year alone." Silence fell over the circle. Chairman Park blinked, his smirk instantly evaporating as his glass frozen halfway to his mouth. The surrounding investors traded wide-eyed, stunned glances, suddenly murmuring in genuine fascination. Min-Jae looked down at Amina, a rare, unmasked look of profound amazement breaking through his icy exterior. She hadn't just defended herself. She had flawlessly validated his business strategy in front of his toughest critics. For the first time, the Ice Prince felt a dangerous warmth bloom in his chest, realizing his fake girlfriend was the most formidable ally in the room. The city below was a quiet galaxy of yellow and white lights. Viewed from the towering apex of the Kang investment headquarters, it was nearly 2 a.m. The sprawling executive office was silent, save for the rhythmic clicking of Amina's laptop keys and the rustle of financial spreadsheets spread across the heavy mahogany desk. Amina had kicked off her heels hours ago, sitting cross-legged on the plush leather chair, with her sleeves rolled up, entirely in her element. Min-Jae sat opposite her, his tie loosened and the top buttons of his shirt undone, a rare, unbuttoned look that made him appear dangerously human. "If we restructure this venture capital fund," Amina murmured, pointing a pen at a line of code on her screen, "we can bypass his stepmother's board allies entirely." Min-Jae didn't answer immediately. When Amina looked up, she found him staring at her, not with his usual calculating gaze, but with an expression that was terrifyingly soft. "You don't just understand business, Amina. You see the human chess pieces behind it," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone in the quiet room. He leaned back, looking out at the glittering Seoul skyline. "My grandfather taught me to see people as numbers. To him, weakness was a liability. I grew up in a house where affection was earned through profit margins. If I lose this merger, I am erased from the family tree. Amina paused, seeing the deep structural cracks in the Ice Prince armor for the very first time. The immense wealth surrounding him suddenly looked less like a throne and more like a beautifully gilded cage. That sounds incredibly lonely, she said softly, her fierce pride melting into genuine empathy. Min-Jae let out a dry, humorless laugh. It is. Everyone wants something from me. My name, my money, my downfall. You are the only person who ever looked at me and told me no. Amina smiled, a gentle, genuine expression that reached her eyes. Well, someone had to. Wealth doesn't intimidate me, Min-Jae. My dream isn't to marry a billionaire. It's to build my own bridge. I want my firm to connect minority-owned businesses in the West and Africa directly to East Asian markets. I want to build a legacy that lifts people up, not suppresses them. Min-Jae watched her as she spoke, her face illuminating with a fierce, brilliant passion. For years, he had been surrounded by people playing roles, but Amina was entirely, breathtakingly real. He stood up, walking around the desk, to stand beside her chair. Amina rose to meet him, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs as the professional distance between them dissolved into the midnight air. Min-Jae reached out, his long, warm fingers brushing a stray curly twist away from her face. His hand lingered on her jawline, his thumb gently tracing her rich, dark skin. The intensity in his dark eyes was no longer icy. It was a burning, magnetic pull. You are extraordinary, he whispered, his face tilting down toward hers. Amina's breath hitched. The contract screamed a warning in the back of her mind, but as Min-Jae's gaze dropped to her lips, the 30-day deadline felt a lifetime away. The rain returned to Seoul, tapping a rhythmic, urgent beat against the glass of Min-Jae's private penthouse. But inside, the atmosphere was entirely changed. The cool, detached atmosphere of a corporate arrangement had evaporated, replaced by a heavy, magnetic stillness. Amina stood by the kitchen island, a half-empty mug of tea cooling in her hands, her mind racing with the memory of Min-Jae's touch from the night before. When his footsteps echoed across the hardwood floor, she didn't turn around immediately, trying desperately to summon the fierce, guarded independence that had always been her armor. "You're quiet tonight," Min-Jae said, his deep voice sliding through the shadows of the dimly lit room. He stepped into her space, closing the distance between them until she could feel the radiating warmth of his body. "I'm just thinking about the timeline," Amina lied softly, finally turning to face him. "Day 21. We're past the halfway mark." Min-Jae didn't answer with words. Instead, his dark eyes locked onto hers, burning with a quiet intensity that made the countdown feel completely irrelevant. He reached out, his large hands gently cupping her face, his thumbs tracing the smooth line of her jaw. Every rule they had meticulously written into the contract dissolved in the span of a single heartbeat. When he leaned down, Amina didn't pull away. Their first kiss was unscripted, desperate, and entirely real. It was a passionate collision of hidden vulnerabilities and a fierce, undeniable attraction that had been building since she first stepped into his car. Min-Jae kissed her as if she were his only anchor in a shifting, hostile world, and Amina wrapped her fingers into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer, completely surrendering to the warmth she had tried so hard to deny. Here, hidden away from the flashing cameras of the media and the cold scrutiny of the boardroom, they weren't a billionaire and a broke student. They were just two people catching their breath in the middle of a storm. Yet while they found sanctuary in the dark, the wolves were already tearing at the gates. Across the city, in a lavishly decorated estate, Min-Jae's stepmother sat at her vanity, her face twisted into a mask of pure coldness. She stared at a glowing tablet displaying high-resolution photos of Amina and Min-Jae leaving the Schiller Hotel. Amina's brilliant performance at the gala hadn't just charmed the investors, it had terrified the woman who had spent a decade trying to control the Kang Empire. Amina was too smart, too influential, and completely unaligned with her family's interests. Sliding a heavy envelope filled with cash across the table to a waiting, shadowed figure, the older woman smiled a cruel, calculated smile. Find out where she comes from, how she pays her tuition, and every single cent that has moved between her and my stepson, she commanded in sharp, cutting Korean. A girl like that always leaves a paper trail. Find the vulnerability and tear them apart. The morning of day 28 began with an eerie, suffocating silence that was violently shattered by the simultaneous buzzing of 3 different phones. Amina sat up in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs as she grabbed her device. The lock screen was inundated with a deluge of notifications, news alerts, and urgent missed calls from the university administration. Her stomach bottomed out completely when she opened the top financial news app. There, splashed across the front page, alongside high-resolution photos of her and Min-Jae, was a leaked copy of their signed agreement and a bank receipt documenting the exact $17,000 wire transfer. The headlines were savage, branding their entire relationship as a calculated, fraudulent transaction designed to deceive global investors. Within the hour, Amina was brought through a chaotic gauntlet of flashing paparazzi cameras into the high-security executive boardroom at Kang Investment. The room was thick with tension, smelling of stale coffee and corporate panic. Min-Jae stood at the head of the long marble table, his posture rigidly defensive, his face a terrifying, unreadable mask of stone. Surrounding him were the senior members of the board of directors, their expressions twisted in profound outrage, led by a smugly triumphant Chairman Park. "This is an absolute catastrophe, Min-Jae," Chairman Park roared, slamming his fist onto the mahogany surface. "You have made a complete mockery of this institution and our conservative investors right before the most critical merger in our history. The international press is having a field day with this paid girlfriend scandal." The arrangement was a private matter to stabilize public image, Min-Jae countered, his deep voice carrying a dangerous, low vibration that vibrated through the room. "It is a fraudulent liability," another board member interjected sharply. "The stock prices are already plummeting. We have called an emergency voting session for tomorrow morning. If you want to save your position as CEO, you have exactly one option. You will hold a live, televised press conference this evening, publicly disavow this foreign girl, and state that she blackmailed you with a fabricated document. Cut her loose completely, or the board will officially oust you from your own empire." Amina stood near the doorway, her breath hitching as the cruel ultimatum echoed through the room. Her fierce pride, the very shield that had kept her standing through every hardship in Seoul, suddenly felt fragile. The financial paper trail had been laid bare by his stepmother's investigator, and now the entire world was looking at her as a scheming opportunist. She looked across the expansive room at Min-Jae, her eyes wide with a painful, agonizing vulnerability. He had spent his entire life building this legacy, enduring a lonely childhood, just to claim his throne. Now he was being told that saving his life's work meant destroying her. The blinding flash of 100 media cameras turned the grand press hall into a wall of white light. Min-Jae stood at the center podium, the weight of the Kang Empire resting heavily on his shoulders. Before him lay the teleprompter, scrolling with the cold, scripted lies his board had demanded, a speech that would brand Amina a fraudulent opportunist and salvage his billionaire throne. Outside the hall, Amina watched the live broadcast from a quiet hallway monitor, her breath hitched, her fierce independence braced for the final, devastating blow. Min-Jae looked at the cameras, then down at the script, The cold transactional logic that had governed his entire life suddenly felt entirely hollow. He thought of Amina's brilliant smile in his midnight office, her proud, natural twists at the gala, and the shattering vulnerability in her eyes when the contract leaked. She had refused to let his world change her. Instead, she had changed him. With a deliberate, unhurried movement, Min-Jae reached out, grabbed the printed statement and tore it in half. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery of journalists. "The document leaked to the press is authentic," Min-Jae announced, his deep, commanding baritone echoing flawlessly through the microphone. 30 days ago, I approached Amina Johnson and offered her $17,000 to play a role. I was a cynic who believed everything could be bought, and I needed a shield against my family's corporate games. The flashbulbs erupted in a frenzied panic, but Min-Jae stepped out from behind the podium, looking directly into the primary camera lens. But what the contract didn't account for was the truth. Amina didn't use me for my wealth. She fought me at every turn to protect her dignity. She saved my reputation, she challenged my intellect, and she showed me a warmth I have never known in my entire life. The contract may have been fake, but my love for her is entirely real. If leading this conglomerate means destroying the woman I love, then I am officially stepping down as CEO. Without waiting for the ensuing chaos to settle, Min-Jae turned his back on the shouting reporters, walked out of the press hall, and pushed open the heavy doors into the corridor. Amina was standing there, tears swimming in her eyes, her heart hammering wildly. He didn't hesitate. He closed the distance between them and pulled her into a fierce, desperate embrace, kissing her with a profound certainty that proved the Ice Prince had melted completely. 1 year later, the Seoul skyline gleamed through the windows of a beautiful, independent office suite in Gangnam. The plaque on the door read Johnson & Kang International Consulting. Min-Jae's dramatic public honesty hadn't destroyed him. Instead, moved by his genuine integrity, the lead global investors had backed him anyway, forcing the board to reinstate him on his own terms. But today wasn't about his empire. Today was about Amina's dream. Standing hand in hand with Min-Jae before a room of international delegates, Amina smiled, her natural curls framed by the bright Seoul sun. She had built her bridge between worlds, not as a bought illusion, but as a brilliant, independent force, standing beside him as a true, undeniable equal.